The first poet reading is Madelein Mysko. She writes poetry and prose. Her work has appeared in numerous national publications, including the Hudson Review, Shenandoah, Commonweal, River Styx, the Baltimore Sun, and of course Smartish Pace. She's a graduate of the writing seminars of the Johns Hopkins University, and she teaches both privately and publicly at the Johns Hopkins Advanced Academic Programs. She's won numerous awards for her writing, including 2 individual artist grants from the Maryland State Arts Council, a Howard Nemeroff Sonnet Award, and an Artscape Prize for Fiction from the City of Baltimore. Our first reader is Madelein Mysko.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here today on the City Lit stage and reading, representing Smartish Pace. In preparing to read today, I naturally went first to the poems that were published in Smartish Pace. And seeing those poems of mine that were published there in the company of others, some of them translations, and even an excerpt in Smartish Pace of the correspondence between the New Yorker and Elizabeth Bishop, who is my favorite poet and also favorite letter writer. This really spoke to me about the connective tissue of poetry and how much that really means. And it wasn't just my work rubbing shoulders in here with other famous poets. It was that serendipitously, in issue 11, which was this one for me, of Smartish Pace, there's this small, lovely poem by the Russian poet Marina, I'm going to do this, Zvitayeva, which was translated actually by my dear friend Anne Friedman. Now, Anne died 3 years ago, before much of her poetry had been published. So I'm remembering how thrilled we were when we realized we were going to be in the same issue of Smartish Pace. And I remember how grateful I was a few days ago when I looked and saw how a good editor had put together so many poems that really speak to each other. At least it seems so to me. So I'd like to begin actually by reading that poem that's not mine, but it was translated by my friend, the poet Anne Friedman. A short poem from issue 11 by Marina Svibatkia from the Moscow Poems, translated by the Baltimore poet Anne Friedman. 9. August 16th, 1916. Hung with red berries, the rowan trees blazed. Leaves were falling, my life's first day. Quarreling, countless church bells chimed a holiday Sabbath, St. John the Divine. Still to this day, I long to chew a sprig of the red rowan's bitter fruit. Now, my own poem that was in that same issue with Anne Friedman's poem is entitled The Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady. I wrote this poem because I was obsessed with this book, The Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady, by Edith Holden. It's a facsimile of a diary that was discovered after her death. She was a great naturalist, and I was responding to her beautiful drawings. Like, this is September, and this one, foxgloves and white roses. And then here's her diary. And after she died, someone had the good sense to make a facsimile of the entire diary, 1 year. So this is my poem in response to my obsession with Edith Holden. And there is an epigraph. The Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady. The epigraph: if, when you hear the cuckoo's cry, you begin to run and count, you will add as many years to your life as you count calls. Edith Holden. Foxglove, trailing rose. A steady rain and dead leaves matted thick against the flower beds. As far around the year as one can get, from pink foxgloves and white trailing roses. And yet I keep returning to June, the drawings in your diary, products of a morning 90 years ago, spread open beneath my lamp. You wrote about the cuckoo calling, changing its tune. But did you run? Did you count? How quickly lines can thicken and dry. I want the portrait of the artist who sat the day long, painting this leaf, this stem, this petal, who drowned in March of her 49th year while gathering chestnut buds along the Thames, as though desire alone were worth the counting, like the cuckoo whistling on the wing. 2. Fruit of the Spanish chestnut and horse chestnut. Like you, I seek particularity. I love this view of green my window frames, a bright foreground of shining holly shoots with pea-green berries nestled at the base, against the textured sway of maple leaves, and in the background, such a depth of oak, the skies reduced to little stars of blue. It took me hours to compose this much, a picture true to what I see, but then the ache to quit took hold. I let it go. The reach for something else has brought me to your diary. 1906, Scotland in late September, when you wrote of rowing over to Inkmahone Priory. Here were huge old chestnut trees, supposed to have been planted by the monks. It must have taken hours to paint these sprigs across the page, the leaves detailed with veins and toothed margins, one yellow, two curled, to represent the coming on of fall. The spiny burrs split open the brown fruit. And what detail were you about to claim the day you drowned? The reach to picture it is dangerous. One ought not lose the hold on each particularity, on buds, on berries pendant there the winter long, on mossy, gnarled roots down to the Thames. That was from issue 11. And then, thank you. And then in issue 18, I had the great delight of having two of my poems published because they were both finalists for the Beulah Rose Prize. I didn't win, but I was a finalist, and two of my poems made it into the issue. I was very, very happy about that. And I'm going to read you those two poems, which are shorter than the previous one I read. The first one is American Cortege. I wrote this poem after hearing a friend of mine play Marcel Dupre's Cortege, a Litany, a beautiful organ piece at a funeral. At the time, I was working on a program for Memorial Day in memory of the war dead. So I wrote this poem after Cortege, a Litany by Marcel Dupre. American Cortege. Stand now at the curb of time, hand against the heart. The great cortege is passing through this hour of pause. Crane the imagination. Impossible to see the head of the line, the first to roll heavily past his mother's weeping eyes. This one now. When and where was he lost, this farm boy from Vermont? No time to wonder. The tolling bells, the drums, the bugle, and now he moves beyond our view, all his sweet particulars draped in the colors of the universal. Red for sacrifice, white for innocence, and for absence. Blue for those dispassionate skies above the battleground. As for the litany, impossible to name them all. Grip the heart then for the crescendo, the weight, the unbearable rolling on and through. And the other poem that was published next to it, is entitled Reading the Terrible Sonnets on Retreat. I went on a religious retreat to a place where you weren't allowed to, silence was observed, and it was very hard for a talkative person like me. And I took with me the terrible sonnets of Gerard Manley Hopkins, it being a religious retreat. So there is an epigraph to that. Reading the terrible sonnets on retreat. And the epigraph? Cliffs of fall, frightful, sheer, no man fathomed, hold them cheap, may who ne'er hung there, Gerard Manley Hopkins. At 3 o'clock the gnome's bells rang, and shoes went squeaking past my door and down the hall to prayers. But as for me, I went to bed with sonnets dark and terrible in hand. The crucifix above me on the wall, the small paned window set against the light, and when I closed my eyes, those images of crosses fading out beneath the lids. All afternoon, such restlessness and dread. The sisters speculated that the guest before had left a sorrow in the room. Pray for the guest before, they said, the way we'll pray when you go home for you. I held it close, that wretchedness, that comfort to my own. Thank you.